Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to introduce someone very special.
From organizing some of the largest parties in New York City and all over the world to surviving Fyre Festival.
Won't go that far, I'm sure, but...
He is the ultimate team player.
His name is Andy King.
Welcome to Take Two with Andy King.
Here we are. Welcome back to Take Two with Andy King. And I'm so pumped today to introduce to you Gabby Bluestone. And Gabby has become a great pal. We have a little history together, Gabby. Yeah. Gabby was part of the team with Vice that produced the Fyre Festival documentary on Netflix. Actually, Gabby, right? We went to the Emmys together, right?
We did, and we had so much fun.
That was hysterical. And Gabby has just authored a wonderful book, written a great book called Hype. And here it is, how scammers, grifters, and con artists are taking over the internet and why we are following. Boom, Hype. So exciting. And of course, one of the main characters is someone that I know quite well, wonderful Billy McFarland. So give us a rundown, Gabby. I know obviously timing-wise right now, it's like between the social dilemma and, you know, that wonderful documentary and now your book, Hype, it's amazing to get a more clear picture about social media and its pluses and its negatives. I mean, what inspired you most to write Hype?
Well, so while I was working on the Fyre Festival story, obviously Billy is a fascinating character. But what really struck me was that what he was doing wasn't that like out of line, right? And I think a lot of people that knew him well really questioned whether he was like this big scammer or just someone who got in over their head. And I could understand why that was, because he was in an industry and in a culture where like the value of a company is how much you can get people to invest in it, not how much you're actually making, right? Or like the value is in the marketing more so than the underlying product. And because our culture has tacitly accepted that, what he was doing was kind of in line with like the industry. Obviously he did commit wire fraud and a number of other things beyond that, but the general idea of like something that's overhyped, like that is Silicon Valley, like that is startup
absolutely
industry.
Think about Mark Zuckerberg, right, and Facebook. I mean, there was Billy with a vision and a kid in his 20s, and as you well know, I mean, he raised over 25 million bucks and walked into many rooms with hedge funds and investment bankers and large corporations. And he was able to sell them on the concept because it all made sense and it was totally cool. I seriously, you know, and we've had this conversation I have obviously with a lot of my public speaking, is that it's been difficult for me obviously after the release of Fyre because obviously, yeah, I lost all my anonymity. I became famous overnight. But one of the things is that if I'm on a street corner or I'm somewhere, 90% of the time, everybody's like, oh my God, it's Andy King from the Fyre Festival. But then every once in a while you get that, oh, there's that scammer. And I'm like, oh my gosh, first of all, and I'll say, Fyre Festival is never designed to be a scam, ever. It was a vision from a young kid who got in over his head. And yes, he had to get creative on how to raise money. And his $1,400 worth of Facebook stock, which he wanted everybody to think he had 14 million, gave him a false platform, but the ability to get in and talk to a lot of big investors and raise some money. So anyway, Gabby, I mean, it is crazy, right? I mean,
that's the thing. If he had pulled it off, that would have been like a legendary story. Like he would have had his own memoirs about the time he took that risk with the Facebook stock and it paid off. What was wild to me was realizing that like that is totally in line with business. Like that is Uber's literal business plan is to drop into places and intentionally violate their rules and regulations and then pay to lobby to change them later. Like I didn't really see what separated Billy from like an Elon Musk, who has been like cited by the SEC, who has pled guilty to charges, but we look at him as this visionary mastermind. And so like that thin line between it was really like kind of the underlying basis of this book.
I love it. You know, and I joke to people about it all the time and I can see in your books some of this angle, which is like, I've always struggled with Facebook and I have to have a presence on Facebook. I'm not sure who does that for me. Somebody does, but I struggled with it from the beginning because I knew so many of my friends and so many people out there who had troubled marriages and difficult children and problems, and posting every day on Facebook. Look, we're at the beach and everybody's smiling. I'm like, oh my God, that kid's a drug addict. And she wants to kill herself and they're unhappy and blah, 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 blah. But it gave this entire false sense of reality where, you know, we always had a joke. We had friends that used to send a Christmas card every year. And the Christmas card was a picture of their home, which basically looked like the White House. And it was huge. And they lived down south and it was always a card that said from our house to yours. And they owned half of the state where they lived. I don't want to say too much, so I'll give it away. But so my mom and I would always joke and say, oh my gosh, here, we had 9 children in the King family. She said, let's all just dress in rags and stand in front of a clam shack out on Cape Cod where we had our house, and then send out a card saying from our house to yours, you know, and just be funny about it. Because of course, I don't want to say, but the wife committed suicide and one of the children died of obesity, but they still had the most grand house, but it was a false sense of reality. And it was kind of fake, like Facebook. But when I describe all these things, then what do you have to say about social media today? I mean, this is the thing, right?
Well, that's a funny example because I think you're right. Like Christmas cards are kind of the original social media where you get to construct a reality and try to convince other people that represents like the true underlying event or family or house. What I find really fascinating about social media is the way that, and you mentioned like the social dilemma, which really delves in, I think, really well to kind of how we are shaped by these algorithms without even realizing it. And it's not like these algorithms were programmed, you know, to do good or to provide us with something good. It's literally designed just to keep us on these sites as long as possible. And, you know, there was like a definite trend, you know, correlation between when social media migrated from just being a desktop thing, you know, MySpace and Friendster and all of those, to when we had iPhones and we had it directly in our pocket all the time. And you see this rise in like unhappiness and loneliness and anxiety that is directly correlated with constantly seeing these highlight reels of people's lives that we, for some reason, are kind of accepting as the real thing. And a really interesting element of that is like this rise of FOMO, which I think the Fire Festival marketing encapsulated perfectly and like used perfectly. That is part of this trend where it's almost like the way that you can present an event is more important than your actual experience of it. So, and that kind of is like a similar thing to that Christmas card where your family might be unhappy, things might not be going well, but if you can take a good picture and send it out to all the neighbors, that's almost more important and means more than what's actually going on in real life.
Oh, I know. It's kind of sad though, right? I mean, one of the weird things that I've learned through social media now is that, you know, we're trying to, you know, the irony, and you know, I've talked about it before, is that I got known for being like the blowjob king of the world, trying to save a music festival and trying to free up a couple 100,000 plastic water bottles. Well, of course, I don't allow plastic at any of my events. And we try to do events that are as close to zero waste as possible. And so through social media now, we try to kind of tailor a lot of my posts to reuse, reclaim, recycle, repurpose, rejoice, you know, and we're all always talking about trying to make sustainability kind of fun and cool, whether it's from a social impact perspective or an environmental impact. But it's crazy because we'll do these posts now, and what the people that follow social media see, I'm amazed with. Like literally we'll do some big post, we'll get all these comments on Instagram and they'll say, wow, I see you read Bonfire of the Vanities. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And they will literally zoom in on my bookcase behind where I'm standing and look at the books that I've read. And I'm like, this is creepy. Like, and they get fixated on these little things. And so that's where I know with Social Dilemma, I mean, you know, talking about crazy, but there it is, like people setting up like a slight fake situation and they're pretend they're sipping champagne, but it's really apple juice. And they're creating this lifestyle that's completely fake because they want people to kind of be a part of that or glob onto them and then hopefully get, you know, big brands to say, hey, we want you to sell our product or promote it. And I'm like, oh my word. I don't even think that way. Like every once in a while now I'll go, oh, Craig, you know, I'll be doing something. We're set up in front of my bar and I'm like, not sure this is a good idea to have all these liquor bottles behind me when I'm talking to a troubled youth organization. I mean, sort of move things around, but it is crazy that way. So, Gabby, with Hype, give everybody a picture of kind of the storyline.
Yeah, so it uses kind of Billy McFarland's story, starting with his first startup when he dropped out of college and ending with his time in prison, to kind of look at our society and our culture from a bird's eye view, and to look at how this concept of hype is really kind of melting our brains, and the way that we're using social media is like destroying our realities. Like we've agreed to this online fiction that is permeating our offline real lives in a way that I find kind of really disturbing. What was fascinating to me about, the Billy McFarland story, obviously it is a crazy story, but it was more not his actual like crimes and kind of what he did, but why it worked so well and why he got away with it. Which I feel like says so much more about the world that we're living in right now. But also, to your point, what you were just saying about, people staging things, one of the things I found so shocking in researching this book is just how much is fake and how much people are, like the lengths that people will go to, right? Like there's this studio in LA that rents out a fake private jet set for $40 an hour so that people can go and take pictures pretending that they've been on a private jet just for the photo. Oh. Or, there's like a thriving secondary market for luxury good packaging. So like Hermes shopping bags or like, big Chanel boxes that influencers will buy on Etsy or eBay and then pose as if they've just like been on, a Clueless style shopping spree.
It's crazy.
Totally wild. There was one influencer who wanted to convince her followers she had gone on a trip to Bali. So she went to an IKEA and did a photo shoot in their like staged area. You know how they like set up.
Oh yeah.
And there were like visible furniture tags in the pictures and nobody noticed.
I mean, it is, and here it is, like for me being somewhat of a conservative older gentleman, I'm like, oh gosh, Craig, do we really want our Mercedes in this picture? Like, I don't want to have that, image. It's like, granted, we live on a farm, and I know there was a lot of controversy with people, with celebrities posting going, oh my God, COVID, and we're stuck at our house. I'm like, people are like, boy, I wish I was stuck at a house that had an indoor Olympic swimming pool and beautiful gardens and, 20 acres. So here we are up on a farm with 400 acres. I'm like, Craig, every day we just post about being grateful and being present and working in our gardens. We weren't, going, oh, woe is me, I'm stuck at home. But it is fascinating, Gabby. So for Hype right now, because you're listed like #1 on social science research with your book, I mean, you had to do a lot of research, right? But it reads more in a fun way and not like a textbook, research book, but you can see, right? Yeah.
Going for.
What were some of the coolest things that you learned writing this book?
I mean, a lot of it was disturbing. But I guess the idea that this is like not really a new thing, like humans have struggled with, okay, actually one of the coolest things that I came across was there is a movie called The Joneses that came out in like, I want to say late to mid to late aughts, that fully predicted where all of this was going well before social media was ever invented, or social media as we know it today. It was written by and directed by this guy, Derek Bort, who had worked in advertising before he went into film. And he was inspired by a real life Campari ad campaign where they would hire models to go into random bars in, big cities like New York and LA. And their only job was just to order Campari at the bar and to try and influence the people around them into ordering the same thing, and it was very effective. So he wrote this movie where it was with Demi Moore and David Duchovny, and a very young Amber Heard. I think it was one of her first movies. And they were basically actors who had been hired by a marketing firm to pretend to be a family. And they would be dropped into a random suburban town. And their job was just to influence all the people in the town. So it's called The Joneses. They were the titular Joneses. And, you know, David Duchovny would buy a certain brand of golfing clubs and then go out on the green, and he would be so well dressed. And so, you know, no one knew what his job was, but he was clearly wealthy. And that was enough to make all the people in the town want to buy the same products